organizations need to be agile in the way that they respond to rapid changes in their environments, like digital transformations, rapid technological innovations, AI, crises. But the thing is, change is really hard. And if you are a manager or an executive and you've been involved in any type of organizational change, then you can probably envision yourself in this situation. You start with planning and rolling out a strategy, getting stakeholder buy-in and getting management and leadership on board. Maybe you'll do a change readiness assessment, you put together a communications plan, you keep stakeholder alignment and engagement on a regular pace, you keep your stakeholders informed, you roll out trainings, you do everything that Change Management 101 has taught you to do. But then in the end, your organization is not changing in the way that you predicted it would. The people that you work with are not changing their behavior over time in the long term. And positive behavioral change is one of the most critical components of any type of organizational change attempt. And the problem is that 20th century change science, things like freeze, unfreeze, freeze, and transitioning from a change to business as usual, as if change was a static thing, is not the way that people change, is not the way that behavior changes. And when you look at it through that lens, through the lens of science, we are trying to run change programs based on 20th century science in 21st century organizations, and that does not work. Now, the root cause in many of the challenges in organizational change management lie within human behavior. And that is because many of the paradigms of 20th century change science, like freeze, unfreeze, business as usual, and seeing change as this static condition, are based on a false assumption about human behavior. Namely, that humans are rational beings and that they make logical decisions. Now, of course, this is true in certain circumstances, but if the science of psychology has taught us one thing in the past 60 years, it is that we are a lot less rational than we think we are. We are actually quite irrational, or as some scientists say, predictably irrational. And when we make decisions, we don't rely on logic, cost, and benefits, but we rely on heuristics and sometimes even cognitive biases. Now, if you change this lens to the organizational perspective, you see what is characterized as a VUCA environment. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. These are the conditions that pretty much every organization lives in the 21st century. These organizations are the opposite of having a stable and predictable environment in which you see where you're going, and are characterized by their chaotic elements. Now, this cocktail of predictably irrational human behavior and this VUCA environment make for circumstances in which change can become incredibly hard. And if you roll out your change management strategy that has all the usual components that you learn in Change Management 101, this means that doesn't guarantee that behavior will actually change, and thus that change will be successful over time. We need to rethink organizational change management practices using the lens of behavioral science. This will enable you to become agile in response to emerging trends, to be proactive and innovative. And what is key for this is keeping people at the center of change, truly being able to humanize change. So how can you go about this? Elements of behavioral OCM include strategies from habit facilitation to behavioral adoption, but also psychology of risk and compliance and establishing cultures of growth. But we want to give you two concrete interventions that you can apply right away in any change project that you are or going to be involved in. One of which is called the Premortem. And this is an intervention that was popularized by psychologist Gary Klein and is a brilliant strategy in which you can mitigate planning fallacies and errors in budgeting and resource allocation at the start of a project. Now, this is also an intervention that we are using with our clients all the time. And recently we applied this at one of our clients, which is a fashion and tech company that is involved in a global transition. Now, what we did was we set up a meeting with all the key decision makers and key stakeholders, and we split the group in two. The first half, we asked to envision the absolute worst outcome of the project, often referred to as the black swan outcome. And they had to work back from that worst case scenario to where we are now in the early stages of the project to figure out what went wrong. So working back. The other group, we asked to do the same thing, but with the ideal outcome of the project and also working back from there. Now, both groups were working back from this either ideal or worst case scenario, and along the way they were identifying the factors that were either making this project an absolute failure or making it an absolute success. And the reason why this works is because you're not thinking forward but backwards, and it becomes a lot easier to identify risks that you otherwise couldn't have thought about. In the worst case scenario, it's often hard to challenge your manager or your executive and tell them, I don't think this planning is right, or I think the budgeting is all wrong. But by creating a narrative together and working backwards from that, it becomes easy to identify and mitigate risks. Now, these red flags that we identified along the way, we then used as critical success and critical failure factors that you can track throughout the project. And the bottom line of conducting a premortem is that you end up with a set of interventions, a set of metrics that are objective, fact-based and co-created, and the awareness of having to keep track of those metrics throughout the project and making sure that you can steer and pivot whenever necessary. Another intervention from behavioral science that you can apply is called shifting the burden of proof. And this one is particularly effective in project dashboarding. So reporting to management or leadership about how the project is going by a dashboard that shows either green, yellow, or red. It's a commonly used method, but it's very susceptible to human error. And managers often report on what has been described as the watermelon problem. So all the dashboards look green on the outside, but the projects are actually red on the inside. The cause of this is that we are very likely to report more optimistically about the progress of a project than the project actually is in reality. Now, this can be quite easily avoided by shifting the burden of proof. In short, you turn the entire dashboard red by default. So the project group has to prove itself by working on each item and make it green. The items that don't turn green are identified as the project areas that need more attention and that need more resources. When you do this up front, it becomes easier to identify these challenges and tackle them accordingly. Here at Neurified, we translate scientific insights into simple yet effective strategic solutions for a variety of client needs, ranging from growth and innovation to leadership development and organizational change management. If you're curious on what brain and behavior can do for you, feel free to reach out.